as we all know, the fire started August 25th. First IPR was the evening, about 1600 hours. We received forgot my glasses. 1627. First IPR, and actually I had a call prior to that before.
What's IPR?
Initial phone report.
Thank you.
So, sorry, I'm just so used to. And actually I had a call from Clint reporting it when one of the truck drivers seen it. So that evening, went and looked at it. Very steep, very inaccessible where it was. So decided to put a helicopter on it that evening. Had the novelty of, which we don't always have, is have a heavy helicopter with a 750-gallon bucket of water. So he did a fuel cycle that evening on that fire and knocked it down pretty good. The next morning, we looked at it again. Smoke still visible due to the rocks and stuff. It gets into the rocks and pop up here, pop up there. So we had another machine the following day, do another fuel cycle on it, and it was still inaccessible. Our biggest thing is safety to the responders and public safety. So I'm not putting anybody out there who they couldn't work it. We looked at it again to see if we could access it, and we couldn't get there. And then it was so steep where it was. There was no way safely to be in there working it. And we also need to have escape routes in the event that something happened and there was no way they could scurry across anywhere.
So at the time when the Fry Creek fire started, that same week there was 122 fires in the Southeast Fire Center that specific week. So what we were doing is we were having oftentimes we were having helicopters, response officers in helicopters. They were out doing what we call recce flights, so reconnaissance flights. They're out looking, assessing each other. Like Art said, that's when they used the heavy helicopter to bucket that specific spot at the time to try to knock it down. And then the next day, like Art said, they came in and they looked and saw it was inaccessible. The number one priority for the BC Wildfire Service is public and responder life and safety. So as Art mentioned, if we cannot safely put crews in, we will not until the fire moves to a space where we call it defendable ground, until a space where the crews can come in, access it, and they not only can defend the ground itself, but like Art had mentioned, we have to be able to have crews be able to get in, but also get out. We call them egress routes. One of the first things that was done once the fire came down to a defendable area was they put in helipads. I just drove your road for the first time. As I'm sure you can tell, we couldn't get like low bed trucks in. So all the resources, all the crews had to be shuttled around with helicopters, and we had to get helicopter pads put in for them to be able to have safe egress in and out. So that started right about September 7th was when the cold front came in, the first cold front. That's when we had significant gusty winds that drove growth down the hill, and that was when the evacuation alert was recommended for the area of Birchdale. Karen.
We watched that fire basically do nothing after the 26th until the 1st of September, which is when it started smoking again. I know because I called it in again that day. And I watched it on the 2nd, on the 3rd, on the 4th, on the 5th, on the 6th. And I'm just really curious why it took until the 7th, when it was huge, before it became actionable.
So
I'll speak to it. It was still in an area, we looked at it every day. Like, it wasn't like it was being ignored. People were looking at it. It was still in a spot where we couldn't safely action it. The other part is the buckets are only effective if we have somebody on the ground to help work that. you can put 1 million gallons of water on something and it's not gonna, it might slow it. I'm not saying it could have made a big difference there or not, but it was still in the spot. I was up the lake on Saturday, I come home, I could see it across the lake. Trust me, I'm phoning my staff going, what's happening? You know, and it still wasn't in a spot where we could do anything with it, Karen.
Would it not have been possible to proactively make a fire break between the fire and Birchdale? Because it was so obvious that it was burning down slope every single day. It wasn't gonna suddenly not do that, right? You could have said, well, here's where we can safely be on the ground. Let's make a fire break proactively.
And safely on the ground over there was at the lake shore, basically.
Which is where it burnt to.
Yep.
And what about retardant?
So,
What's the effectiveness of retardant? You said that you have to be careful with water because that can spread the
yeah,
fire.
retardant dries out after 12 hours and it's not effective.
Mhm.
So,
Water on it is effective.
but it washes it off. So it's a double-edged sword when we go after something right in the initial stages. You bet we're gonna try to put as much retardant in there as we can and then wash it off. There was also a concern with retardant from the Birchdale neighbors as small fries where they get their water from. And retardant, in all honesty, is a fertilizer. But it is very salty and stuff, and it, you know, it will rinse off, but it takes time.
I did have a message from a Birchdale resident that wanted to thank you for not using retardant near their water system, and that their water system was saved, and they appreciated that. I didn't know at the time when I was communicating with our staff that Little Fry Creek was a water system. It's an independent one, so we don't always know where they are. So they wanted me to let you know that they appreciated how difficult that was to do, given that you were aware of the water system that was there, and that retardant anywhere near that water system would have caused them problems. So they wanted to pass on a thank you for that.
Oh, thank you.
There's another little piece of that, and that is that it took a lot of communication and finally an actual meeting between Bobby and Peter and you in order for, it seemed, in order for your system to pay any attention to local knowledge. And that's an important, a really important thing. You know, obviously we know about weather conditions in this area. You were getting somewhere in the system, you were getting phone calls from people, you were getting emails from people saying, this is what we think is going to happen, this is what we can see is going to happen. And it was basically ignored. And it stirs up a little passion in me because we had exactly the same situation when we had the landslide 10 years ago. And it wasn't anything to do with your department, but it was government. And the people that came in absolutely ignored local knowledge. And in fact, the people who came in, first of all, weren't trained for working in a rural, remote area. And secondly, were doing their operations like looking for your lost key under the street light when you've lost it up in the middle of a block. That's what was happening. And you know, we felt completely ignored, we felt disregarded, and we felt disrespected. And I think I've heard similar things with this operation as well. So for your information.
For sure. I would love to speak to that piece. The crew, I mean, the Kootenay Lake Zone does have an awful lot of local knowledge. Like, Art spent his formative years, actually, summers out here. So there is that piece. I am one of the people that take many of the phone calls and answer many of the emails. Mm-hmm. So I was receiving these phone calls and these emails, and we were definitely being passed to the zone. For instance, one of the first phone calls I took was from a resident, or not a resident, sorry, like a property owner in Birchdale. And that was the first instance that I had that the Small Fry Creek was the watershed. Mm-hmm. And so from that information was automatically passed on to the zone, and the zone did already have that knowledge, but that came from a resident in Birchdale to me and then right to the zone. We are a small team, we're a small crew in the information program section, and so we do our best to give everybody who needs the information and the time, we do our best to give them the time. And understanding that we are listening to you, but we do have to cycle through our phone calls really rather quickly. And so I'm gonna be the first one. If you felt like that, that's on us, and I apologize for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Can I just acknowledge, Kate, that it's interesting because we all get different calls from different people, and I was checking in with, my contact was Ross Lake for Birchdale, and he was communicating with the community there, and then I got on their email list, so that was good, but I was just basically checking in, like, are you guys getting what you needed? What I had understood from them was that there was a lot of on-the-ground conversation happening that wasn't over email or phone calls, and what I heard at the time was that the crews that were actually on the ground was where people were focusing the local contacts, and it was being well received. I'm not saying what you heard wasn't true, I'm just saying we get all different pieces of it. And to acknowledge that the ground crew that was there was seemingly quite involved with Birchdale and Murphy Creek folks, and really grateful for all the equipment they already had. And so there was, they told me, don't worry, we'll let you know when we need something or something's not working. It doesn't mean I never heard from Roberta, but I did hear later on that they appreciated the fact that the ground crew was listening quite well, and they were actually asking questions of them.
I have no concern with the ground crew at all, and had similar kinds of interactions
Feedback.
with them. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of
It's
communications.
the systemic
Yeah,
aspect of it, as you know.
yes.
And as you know, Brittany.
It was so integrated that I was calling Jerry Devine at Birchdale, or not at Birchdale, at Schroeder Creek when we knew the SAR truck was going over the boat, and he went down to clear the landing because Bickle Road's always full, and they had overheard evacuation order, and he called me right back and he's like, it's not an order. I'm like, no, it's not an order, it's an alert. And he's like, okay, great, I got it right. But even those communications were all on the beaches between the two, and while I was a little worried that the wrong information was getting out, I was like, people are communicating, that's the point, that's good. And so it gave me a bit of assurance knowing that that was happening on the ground.
Okay.
Doesn't mean things weren't missed.
No, and Kim alluded to the number of fires and stuff. This wasn't the only fire on the landscape that we have to communicate out. And again, it's not great that things are missed, but it's by nobody's intentions of not getting back.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I understand that and I respect that.
You know, we, in our zone alone this year, we're at 78 fires, which is big for us. The only ones we get focused on. All the little ones we've had great success on, under the carpet. It's these ones what cause, you know, and I get it. And I've been doing it long enough to understand it. Like,
So the reason I made a point of attending tonight is I wanted to ask some questions around the relationship of the wildfire response stuff to the parks.
yep,
Because I feel that once it's a park, it's like it's the au naturel, no value resource out there. And, you know, you knocked it down that night and the next day, and the cost that ended up being spent on this, you could have had a little tiny 206 with its tiny bucket flying from then till now, and it would have been a fraction of the cost of what got blown on this thing. And I feel like that doesn't happen because this park thing is like, let her ride, let her be natural. And at some point, the park and the communities have to come together. And there's pressure around here for bringing this damn park closer to our properties, right to them. And I'm dead against it because I feel these parks are a nemesis, not a, like, I don't want it near my property.
yeah.
And so I'm wondering, like, how much influence are you guys under with a park and trying to, I mean, you guys were up there fighting it, you had it again under control after we were all here with heavy equipment, and it was looking good, and the second we had 4 ounces of rain, the decision was made to abandon ship. And I think it's due to the park, but I might be wrong, so that's my question.
So with parks, yes, parks does have a let burn policy, and fair enough. Again, where it was, and you know where it was, Clint, because me and you sat on the beach there and looked
Yeah.
at it.
Speak a bit louder, please.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
You know, we can work with parks and say, yeah, they do get a little excited. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, you know, of us cutting trees down and doing a bunch of stuff. Fire is a natural effect. But when it's life and property, we can engage for sure, 100%. you know, it's an open conversation with the land manager on that side. And we work with them very collaboratively on that. On the particular where it was, and then the cold front, yeah, it caused the issues. Going back to your comment, Karen, why we weren't out in front of it with the guard and stuff. We're looking at natural features all the time. Like, it's not just, well, we'll see what happens. No, we're planning. We have a program that predicts. It doesn't work great in the mountains, but it does predict kind of what happens and what might happen. Again, knowing the terrain and being here my whole life and experienced a ton of fire, kind of had, you know, I'm not going to say nailed it, but we didn't miss by much, minus the part that it did come across Fry Creek. We did not think it would come across there. Felt pretty confident, but it did.
So, I'm just curious about the technical basis of that sense of confidence that it wouldn't cross the creek, because it looked pretty darn obvious to me and others who were watching it that it was gonna cross the creek.
Yeah, and just fire goes upslope, you know, wrapped around the corner, fair enough. But what happens is we get the downflows, and it had some mixing, obviously, which crossed it over. Usually you would have that downflow at night, and it would push it down. But what has happened a lot this summer, because our temperatures have been so elevated and stuff, a thermal belt sets up. So it might be 10 degrees down here. Like right now, we're all waking up in the morning, our grass is all wet, everything's all moist. It's still been 20 degrees up at elevation every night. It has not broke, hence why the smoke hangs in the valley every morning until a certain time.
So, I feel like that didn't actually address my question. So what was the basis for the sense of confidence that it wouldn't cross the creek because of the downdraft, or?
Well, no, just the way the contours of the land and stuff are, we felt, you know, we're also going with,
Fallible humans?
yeah,
That's okay, I recognize that.
you know, like, not perfect by any means, but at the end of the day, yeah, it did. And, you know, I can pull the fire history on this whole side of the hillside. It's fire prone, and it goes, we have data all the way back to the 20s of mapping, and it just layer after layer after layer.
I didn't want to cut you off, that's why I put my hand up, so when you're done.
Yeah.
Those trees up there are 400 years old, 450 years old.
Yeah.
It's not,
But it,
but
go ahead.
it's not a very recent fire.
No, but what it is doing right now is probably what it did a lot of the times. Is this, my personal opinion, and I'm going to say it in front of this group, I don't really care what, you know, how you feel, but this fire is doing nothing but great for this community right now. You fly over that, and you look at that forest floor in there, it is littered.
So that's part of my question. Well, two questions. One is how much has it hit the crown, or is it more of a ground fire? And the other question is actually, would you have had a different operating mandate if it was not a park? Honestly, if it was an operable timber, would it have been a different operating? And I'm not discounting that the terrain was a big part of it. I was actually in Fry Creek the day it started. I did not start it, but I saw it on the other side of the lake.
So she says.
But I had friends who were camping and they were watching it
Yeah.
for a week, and the rock face was very much, you could see that the rock face made it inoperable. I understood
Yeah.
that part, but I do think it's a really relevant conversation regarding, it's a really catch-22. Fire, the way it burns, like what happened in Briggs Creek and how close it got to the community, as much as that was scary for the community, as an elected official, I could see that it was actually doing what we might pay to do through mitigation work. It did a backburn in a really healthy way that now the community is pretty protected. So I don't discount that when a fire can go, it's a natural process and it's good for the forest, it's good for the ecology, it's a good thing. How close you let it get to a community is always that's what you guys have to roll with, and that's your job, and I respect you for it. But when you're in the park context, I am really curious, because we know Glacier Creek's getting a lot of effort. And we know that it's not necessarily community there, there's definitely timber values. So what's the difference? Is it all the terrain, or is it really that you have timber values versus the park, which have different mandates for management?
No, so Glacier Creek, for example, was accessible from day one. We're able to safely put people in there and go at it. And we're in there today again because it's now into cut blocks. So if we could have got accessibility right away, you bet. We had this conversation that night, me and Clint on the beach, and some other residents were there.
Yeah.
And, you know, we will go after this, but where?
So the park didn't change the operable plan.
No, the park, we had, with park's consent, when we get these bigger incidents, we have to do what's called a fire analysis. And so that goes back to the land manager. They have to agree on our tactics and strategies. When it comes to this is where we'll be able to work it. Fair enough. So they're all fine with us working that fire. A little nervous about cutting down a bunch of fir trees and stuff because we have to do a bunch of work after that because of the fir beetle scenario.
And sorry, it is staying more of a ground fire. It hasn't hit the crown.
This right now, it was crown at the beginning, you know, everybody could see it ripping up the hillside 100%. Right now, this is beautiful backing fire. This fire has moved in the last 7 days about 35 meters down the slope, roughly, in 7 days.
So it's doing a bit of a forest floor cleanup is
It's-
what you were alluding
Yeah,
to.
and going back to Jerry, I believe,
Yeah.
Jerry's comment about the trees are like, some of those trees are 400 years old. That's probably, on a lot of that fire history, you probably pull that up, it was probably a low intensity backing fire. And what's happened is those trees have got so big, all that understory is choked out, so it's all died and fell on the ground, you know.
Actually, I was kind of shocked today. I came down the hill, and I looked at it a few days ago. It seems like it's come way around towards Kootenay Creek.
Yeah,
It's going down into the creek down in there.
it's gonna come into the draw. So we were in there this morning.
That's I forgot my glasses, but quite a few things about this wildfire update that confused me, I guess you could say. Talks about I haven't got my glasses. Containment lines and that kind of thing, and burning pockets of leftover timber. I mean, it's moving steadily along. I don't know.
So
What do you call a containment line? I mean, Kootenay Creek, is that or triggers to get worried about? I mean, what are they? I mean,
yeah, so Kootenay Creek for sure is a trigger line because that's getting super close to the residents again.
but that's a long ways from.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but the containment lines, going back to your question, the containment lines is the crews worked from the beach and punched all the way up to the ridge line and then went across where they could keep going. And so that's what we've been monitoring on the backing. They have a feel free. It's basically not a handguard, it's nothing, it's where they went in, cleared the slash, and made a path.
Doesn't seem like that's happening, no? I mean, it's steadily working its way around the side hill. It doesn't seem like there's no guards or anything, is there?
No, it's just, like I say, a feel free where they've went and cut.
And you're saying that it's along the bottom. They cut along the bottom.
They
They
come
didn't try
across-
to flank it. They just cut across the side of the hill to keep it up on the upper slope.
Above the Frankie trailer.
Yeah, up high, like,
Up higher.
yeah. And so they've come across, sorry,
No, you go ahead.
they've come across the slope, and like I say, is we looked at it this morning again, and the crew actually was gonna walk in there this morning again, but we did look at it from the air. Unfortunately, it was super smoked out, so we couldn't get a good GPS track of the actual true perimeter of where it is on this side, just a good visual.
What I was gonna ask was, when you say they did a cleanup, are you talking about they went in and did a bunch of ladder fuel cleanup, like the lower end stuff is?
Yeah, they'll prune the trees a bit, but more of a path, like where we could run hose in a hurry, whatever. It's not you'd walk in there and you just see where somebody's went through with a chainsaw and cleaned this up.
And how high up is that in relation to the private property, like Tony
It's
Vaughn's property?
It's quite a ways from their property.
Up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Seems like we're just really lucky that it's September and not July.
October,
Because-
despite the weather.
October, yeah. But when it started, or when it really got going, I mean, if it would have been July, you would probably be doing something.
To speak to that point from my perspective, looking at it, so we stopped at shorter on the way up here, had a look at it where it had burnt before, and then we stopped again on our way over here and then up on the road as well. Like what Art was saying is seeing how that healthy fire has gone through that forest, like that forest is going to survive. Had this been July,
Yeah.
then it just would have nuked everything down. You'd just be looking at moonscape up there. Then you get into a whole bunch of geotechnical issues, because what happens is all of that overstory, there's nothing to dissipate the energy from the rain when it hits, and so then it hits right onto the ground. There's no organic layer left, so it hits right into the soils. It starts mobilizing those, and oftentimes they're even hydrophobic. So you start getting into debris flood, debris flow things again, which of course, with the history around here, not a good thing. It takes a long time for the forest to regenerate. It creates its own fuels again once all that stuff falls down. So what's this fire has done in general, like Artie, I agree with him 100%. It's a beautiful looking landscape. This is what we would call what is, and you know, it'd be interesting to look at it or get somebody that has a whole bunch more brains than I do to look at what is the ecology of fire up here. What is the typical fire regime? Because it's probably a fire like this that rumbles through every sort of 30, 40 years and cleans up all of that blowdown, all of that underbrush, all of that stuff that's been beetle killed or whatever, and just cleans it up, and hopefully in a nice mellow manner. Now when you look at our provincial situation, which we've been fighting fires for a long time, and you know, when I used to fight fires, we used to be called fire suppression. We just put them out. And then we moved to wildfire management branch. Now, you know, it's moved along, but now you see a lot of these fires, and of course climate change is part of it, but you see these fires that are absolutely just nuking hillsides. Because yes, climate change, but also they have so much fuel on the ground because we've interrupted that fire regime. So what's happening up here is a really natural, a really good thing. It's, you know, it causes anxiety, of course, because it's on people's doorsteps. But this is, you know, a really wonderful looking fire. You're gonna have a green looking mountain, you know, there'll be some red patches here and there, but that's how you get your mosaic and your healthy forest, right? Because in those red patches, it'll give an opportunity for some deciduous to grow up and offer a bit more of, like I said, like a patchwork of age of trees and you know, the type of forest that you're looking at. So really good for the ecosystem. And you got some folks that live in the communities around here that can talk to this at length. I'm not in person. Sorry, Karen first is in behind, and then there, and then up to Rick.
I'm, like right now, don't feel super concerned about the fire watching it. Certainly, 10 days ago, it was crowning a lot more. I was seeing like, oh, there's one blazing spot. Oh, now there's two blazing spots. Oh, now there's three blazing spots. And I totally do understand the basis of the kind of fire that it is right now, and I'm happy. I've been in Johnson's Land 5 years. I've been watching the fuel load increase year by year because of the Dougfir bark beetles. So I agree. What it's doing right now is good. My concerns are far more with the relationship and communication, or lack thereof, between the bureaucracy and the community. So one question is, why was there not someone designated to communicate? Like whenever I learned anything, because I happened to on the road cross paths with like Mitch Ryan, I think is that?
Yeah, that's correct.
Mitch Ryan, or Rick walked it and gave me an update. I'm on the board of the community association. I would send that information out to the whole community, but days would go by where there was no communication, and you know, that has continued. I'm really glad that you're here now to answer these questions, but the lack of communication was in some ways more troubling than just simply observing the fire.
I'll talk to that, Carrie, as the information officer. So like I mentioned earlier, we are a small but mighty team, and there was a number of fires happening at the same time. We did do a number of communications out. The tricky part is, so we would communicate on social media, for instance. Hearing that, yes, okay, there was a number of people that Wi-Fi is a common thing and people are very connected out here, then we learned that there was a number of people that weren't getting those types of communications. Knowing that this was a rather, like in the early days itself, knowing that this was a really rather small community, I think I talked to everyone that lived in Birchdale. And so I felt like, I personally would feel like that in-person communication is better, going to have that one-on-one, to have those phone calls, than actually putting out a social media post itself. So I've been in regular communications through email and on the phone with a number of residents of Birchdale and Johnson's Landing. And then once the fire was being held and that those containment lines were developed, there was a long period where like there didn't seem to be a need from the community itself for that communication out. So essentially what happens is oftentimes we'll have based on the number of phone calls that come into me, I can say, okay, well, this community's hungry for information on this, so let's put something out. And there was a long period in time where those phone calls or those emails stopped, and so we didn't put anything out. And then I started hearing more about the smoke that was happening out here, and so that's when we put out that community bulletin to explain this is what being held means. There is containment lines. There are this fire analysis with trigger points, and if those trigger points are hit, then yes, we will change our response type. We opted not to put that out through social media, and instead put that out. I talked to Dan Elliott with the RDCK, and we opted to put that out through people like, I'm assuming yourself, Karen, because I asked the RDCK, like, do you have a few influential people in the area, their emails, that we can disseminate it out this way? And then it seems to have worked, because we got a number of emails back as a result of that.
I didn't get it from you. It was forwarded to me and I sent it out to the whole community.
Yeah, so that's exactly was the point. We built it in a way that we could get it out to people that would then forward it around within the community. That's something that's a tactic that we use if we can't physically get there to post a bulletin, but we have a community like yours that is not necessarily the most digitally connected.
And Karen, when that first bulletin came out, I said I'll get it to them, and then I ended up in meetings all day, and I didn't get it to you till the end of the day. But I had seen someone on Facebook with it, so then I didn't replicate it. So that was me in the middle, which isn't always the best thing, depending on what's going on.
I know, I'm familiar with the game of telephone.
There are just
It
some,
was Susan Archibald who sent it to me
Yeah.
because she knew that I would send it out to
Sorry, we just got Clint, is it? And then to Rick, and then to you. Does that work?
Yeah.
Thanks.
So, just listening to the comments about this being a good thing, and I don't disagree with that. I think it is getting surrounded a little bit with things that are less volatile can't be bad. And so I would just like to say that there's other ways to do this, and it has been happening concurrently. I just logged over 500 loads of wood off of the Salisbury face for porcupine, and Selective logged a lot of it. They're going to do some fire mitigation work in there and all the rest of it. And the public received that very poorly, to the point that our regional district director was on Facebook against it, some of that. And so I would just like to say that that this is something everybody needs to think about. And there is other ways to do this with a benefit to the community coming back. Every load of logs that moved around the province of BC this summer with the high stumpage was worth over $5,000 to the government. So there is other ways to do things around communities that have some value without watching it burn just because it's a park.
Clint, that's not what I was against. That's misinformation.
I read your stuff on that.
Well, then he misunderstood it.
Yeah.
Anyways,
That's definitely not what I was against. I actually worked hard on that program, significantly, with a lot of backlash from Bill Castell to try and get the community to understand it. So please don't spread that misinformation.
so to go to your comments, Clint, is the other thing is accessibility for us is huge. You know, we live in a beautiful place, of course, but for us to be very successful at our jobs, like, I'm going to tell you, lucky it's us who were here and not somebody else, because other people would have come in here and said we're burning it from McCarthy's property to everybody's property line and rip the whole mountain off. Where we take a different approach. We would sooner see it come to us in a nice slow thing. Other teams would have come in here and just said, nope, pushing a guard across here, we're ripping her off. And so the point I'm getting at is accessibility, but going back to Clint's comments, you know, the wildfire risk reduction, some stuff around the community is not gonna hurt. If we have better access, we're gonna have better success. And it's not, I don't mean go in and clear cut or do anything, I'm just saying, if we, you know, there's programs out there to tighten this up and make it way better for everybody and ease a bunch of angst of people. You know, me and Rick have talked about this a million times above our agenda and stuff. You know, this is where we live, and until everybody wants to get on board and try something different. Don't like fires, probably not the best place to be living. You know, like in reality, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It happens everywhere. We have them above Nelson, you know, and it creates a lot of angst for people.
Rick?
Yeah, well, first of all, I have to just correct Karen a little bit. I did not actually walk the fire. I was paying quite a bit of attention for a while there. And I'd also like to concur that, like, what we have now, sort of a cool meandering fire, is actually probably good for the forest. However, going back to earlier in September, you know, there's a point, well, we're just really lucky we didn't get a giant south wind, because it could have come right across. And so in view of that potential, I have sort of a local knowledge kind of question. Well, yeah, I took it upon myself to come down here, and I met the head of the SP, the Structure Protection Unit, and showed him the best place to put a pump in Gar Creek, and actually came back the next day because he was changing, there was a changeover to another guy. I never really got to talk to the IC. I'm not even sure if it was Leanne or who it was, but anyway, my point is that do you know that, well, coincidentally, I was in charge of putting in a new water line for the south side of Johnson's Landing, which is a 4-inch line that goes way the hell up Gar Creek. And there's two points where I installed 1.5-inch fire couplings right off the 4-inch line that are in the range of 286 psi, which is considerable. One's were just above the top of Johnson's Landing, and the other's quite a bit further up the Kootenay Road. So, well, I actually showed the SBU guy the lower one and sort of vaguely described where the upper one was. And it seems to me that that's a piece of local knowledge. And did that information go up the line to the Kootenay Lake zone? So
Yes.
that you were aware that
I was aware of them
yeah.
well before
Well,
because
that's right, I drove up there with you once.
me and you went and looked at them.
Yeah,
But Leanne did bring it up. You knew this, and I said, yeah, it's in our pre-org actually that it's there.
well, good. I think they should actually be on the map. And also tagged with, you should contact somebody like myself or John Lerbsher in the eventuality that they need to be used, because there actually is a bit of a limitation on the amount of water going into the intake, and if there's heavy sprinkler use at the same time, there has to be some coordination there.
100%, Rick. It wouldn't be like we would go up there and crank a valve on it and say, it's for the water. No, and I know you put it in, and we would reach out to you, and I was well aware that those two
Good.
were there.
I'm glad about that, because, yeah. So, because if it had been a south wind and it ripped right across above,
Yep.
I mean, I would also volunteer to do line location for a cat guard from that water point at the upper PRV station. Would have been a logical, well, depending on what the fire was doing, it could have been a logical place if you had to put in a cat guard in a hurry, because you could string Bois out right behind the cat, right? Anyway, that's the kind of local resources and local knowledge that I think in the best scenario should be included in the system, and it does require some communication.
And we, sorry, just before we
Yeah,
get
yeah.
to the gentleman in the back, we did have Clint fly it with Leanne and stuff, because Leanne had a vision where she thought
Yeah,
this is where we could go in the event of something happening. And Clint being, we're not equipment experts, he knows where he can go and where he can't. We had kind of a,
It was figured that we could probably go what we call Flanagan, the little bulb patches up there, that we could go above that and guard and kind of try to hold it there was
Yeah,
what was established then.
yeah. And you made good use of all the old grown-up roads here. Without having to carve out new ones.
Thanks, sir. At the back.
You're probably not gonna make the mistake of calling me a gentleman again after this. First thing I'd say is the interesting period for me was between about September 1st and 7th, when the fire started to blow up. And some of our communication at that point was, oh, trust the Wildfire Service. I'll be blunt, that's bullshit. We were watching the fire grow, we were watching it candling on the ridge, we were watching it go down slope, watching it go down into Front Creek, and we were calling on a regular basis. And we are not naive or stupid here. We saw what was happening. And so I'd say that that wasn't a particularly useful kind of communication. The other thing I would say was one of your employees, at some point here, told me that the management of the fire was a cataclysm of errors, with the exact words. I'd be interested to know what that cataclysm of errors consisted of. And I think that a lot of your points are clear, and we knew those. For example, the inoperability of the terrain. But it went from really just, as you say, a small ground fire to up to a class 4 fire with pyrocumulus clouds above it, and charged into Fry Creek in a very relatively short time. And my impression was that, and we were calling pretty regularly, many of us, my impression was that we were getting a little pat on the head, patronizingly saying, now, we know what to do, don't you guys worry. So that's how it felt and appeared from this side at that point in time. And it was very critical. The fire was not behaving well at that point.
sorry you felt that way, because that is not our intention by any means, to make people feel that way. That is the last thing we want people to feel, that they're being ignored or we're the experts on everything. That is not the case.
Well, what we see here is that the work and the communication with the crews on the ground is fantastically good. I tremendously respect their abilities. I would say that probably the firefighting crews and system in BC is probably among the best in the world. But I'm not at all impressed with the bureaucracy behind it. Not even close.
And some of the people at the 1-800 line were straight up rude.
Yeah. Like
I know
with that.
that's not your responsibility, but that's just a piece of feedback
Yeah.
that maybe you can, send up the line. Like, I don't know, they're at a call center in Vancouver or Victoria or Halifax.
I'll send that up the line, Karen.
But they were rude.
Yeah, I'll make sure.
Like, we know, like, you don't know, you don't see what's happening right this
Yeah.
minute.
It came up at the Briggs Creek update as well from the public, and I believe what was indicated at that time, I think it was Mike that was at that meeting.
Yes.
And he definitely, recognized that was unfortunate, and what was occurring is when you're calling the 1-800 number, like, first of all, I just want to acknowledge that there's a different number once a fire is going. I remember it was 318 something.
7715.
There you go. And I started redirecting people there because the 1-800 number is, like you said, a call center that's like, yeah, it's on our dashboard. Why are you calling us again? Whereas the local aspect is the one that's like, this is further information. Where is it now? And it's that more detailed conversation.
Yes.
So I think Mike had indicated at the Briggs Creek fire, it's always good to, like, once it's a wildfire of note, I did notice this year after being in this for 8 years and having different fires in different areas, that the information this year, not to discount that people don't feel like there was enough, was significantly more than what's been in the past. Because they made it a wildfire of note both times, which means I could see all the updates every day. Are they minute by minute? No. And there's still room for improvement. But the one thing I heard at the Briggs Creek fire was that once it's reported to the 1-800 number and it's an active fire of note, when there's further information, go to the local 318 7715.
Yes, ma'am.
There you go.
That
And then
number,
you have a local person who actually has local context to be like, oh, you're talking about this, it's moved over here, and then you have a more concise conversation.
So many people didn't know that number?
Yeah, and I started sharing it, but probably I haven't been able to keep up with Facebook enough, and I was like, Karen's on it, and then I realized I need to have Karen too, so I'm sorry about that.
so that number was on the Wildfire of Note page. I think it did change for about 2 days, and then it switched back to me. I do have, I believe, I have cards on me, so I will make sure to leave some with, like, for yourself, Karen, and yourself, Amy, and so that way, and Brittny, the community, if you have any fires in the future, hopefully no time soon, you guys can just have that number directly, and that one's activated all through the fire season. It's usually done in November, but we'll keep that phone line going a little bit longer this year.
We'll put it on our community. We have a phone tree for the community to inform people. And in fact, that when I had met Mitch Ryan in our trucks on the road, and he told me, he said, "Are you on evacuation order?" And I was like, "No, I'm just on my way to my daughter's house." And he was like, "It's an alert. Anyway, it's not an order." And I was like, "Okay, thank you." But, so, you know, I called around to the community, and that was before, as Amy said, Kaslo Sar came up, which was great, and did the door-to-door. But it takes them time to mobilize. Whereas the people in the community were already here. We know how to reach each other. We all have each other's phone numbers and emails and stuff like that. So if there's a way that you can know a couple of contacts in the community, like me, Susan, you know, there are others, then like use us as a resource because we can get information out really fast.
The thing,
Yeah, sorry. I'll just make the note that the RDCK, we own the process of evacuation alerts and orders. We work with BC Wildfire Service to establish when those occur. But that whole process of getting people out, calling out search and rescue to help out, and it's a great point. You know, we will still go and knock on everyone's door to make sure that it was effective.
And help those sheep.
Yeah, whatever it might be. 500 ostriches last year in Edgewood. You know, whatever we come across. Yeah, it's a great point, and it's something that we typically try to do is access that, and we post it out when we go to alert. And our communications person, Dan Elliott, has over the last couple of years really tried to plumb into all the local like Facebook pages and find who those local contacts are, so that it's sort of, you know, I remember. Sorry, I see you hand there. I get you. I remember the first fire that I was at here, and in 2018 it was down in Edgewood again, actually. Good times down there. Anyways, and so afterwards we went to a public meeting, and they were rip-roaring mad that we didn't hear anything, yada yada. And it's okay, well, you know, we put it out on the socials, but you know, okay, so we also it was out on the radio a bit, you know, and then we also sent out a media release, so the media gets out on, you know. They were like, none of that works. It's like, okay, well, what do you want? They said, well, you fax it to the store, and then we'll post it on the cork board. I was like, all right, we'll fax it out to you. You know, got to find a fax, and then we'll send it out there. You know, so every community has its own little method, and we're building up our understanding of that.
Part of the context that, you know, Chris had to hear from me probably a little more than, well, you're always very polite to me. But because of the location of Birchdale and Johnson's Landing and being a part of search and rescue, it really gave me a good intro. I didn't enter operations, but I was able to see the timeline. So I was going to Chris to go to BC Wildfire to say that was a 7-hour process from top to end, including water access. And knowing the road up here, which most people aren't aware of how tricky this road is, and frankly, Jerry, the road has been it's always on the list. Modi's on her list now. Regardless, I was letting him know that we can't treat this like a normal, easily accessible area. If not that I want us to jump to order, but we had to consider access and being able to get out and getting those alerts out within the geographical context. And so that was something Chris was hearing from me quite often. I don't want us to go to order, but do know that if we get close to it, we have to think sooner than later on it because of that.
And we share that, like, we have our our baseline to put like an order, to get an order together is about like the minimum that we like to say to Wildfire, because this is what we talk about and understand our timing. Minimum is like 12 hours. We got some communities that are 20, 24 hours to get them out. So they know that. They adjust what they're seeing on the hill to say, okay, well, this is when, things get really twitchy. Well, let's move that line back this far because we need 20 hours to get everybody out of there. So we know that in general with our communities, the easiest community in the world takes us 6 hours, right? Like 6 mile outside of Nelson. Our EOC's, 10 minutes away to get everybody organized, to get everything written up, to get all the official stuff signed off, to get people out of there. This is all about a strategic evacuation, right? As opposed to a tactical. Tactical is like, get the fuck out, things are going real wrong, So the strategic one's 6 hours, kind of bare minimum.
Yeah.
And it's just a big beast to get rolling.
And I just want to say, like, for us on our side, we can do tactical and follow up. So if our staff figured, so the day the evacuation alert was put in place, it was a younger person went order on the radio, and that's what panicked everybody. The IC at the time, Leanne, looked, whoa, this was alert, right? And that's okay. He's thinking, ooh, and she's more, no, we got time to do this properly, so let's slow down the boat.
There's a lot of communication between alert and order.
Oh, yeah.
And, yeah.
Could I just say one thing?
Sure, yeah. I don't think we had it on the queue. Oh, yeah, we did, right here. Sorry.
You can go ahead, Rick.
So
Yeah.
it'll be quick. Just want to mention that another example of local resource in this context. So I was actually a fire warden up here for 15 some years, and then I finally stopped. And the agreement I had with ASA at the Kootenay Lake Zone was that if things ever get hot and heavy up here, you can on the phone call away kind of thing. I can swing in, and that that could be true in this type of scenario, right? Because I know just about everybody up here, and I have a relationship with Kootenay Lake Zone, so it's just another potential resource, right?
Perfect. Thank you. Sorry. Go ahead.
I'm Jenny Phoenix.
Hi,
I'm
Jenny.
Karen's daughter.
Hi.
It's great to hear that the RDCK is utilizing more of those community communication systems. As you said, the Edgewood store and in Argenta, it is very much a post office bulletin board, and Rick's partner, Deb, is part of the Argenta Emergency Preparedness Group.
In my cell phone.
And right,
Chris
so
and Deb talk a lot.
yes, so great. So there is a phone tree in Argenta also, and yeah, I really wanted to say I think it's great that the RDCK is working on building that sort of database of who in the various communities, because I think that's paramount, and I think that's what I've heard all along and at this meeting is use those local communication networks because they are what was working.
Most of us don't do social media here.
Yeah, and I'll just say to that, to turn it right back on you guys, like, I always brag about AJL as a whole and how organized you all are and how easy it makes everything to deal with, and really the whole Lardo Valley. So we have contacts throughout the Lardo Valley because you guys are, like, I like to say, the far reaches of the empire, right? So we have good, solid contacts that we know that we can always get in touch with folks. And just your level of organization is fantastic. What you're doing here with, talking about getting the cooler in and the backup, and in Argenta and the emergency management group or emergency response group up there, all the SBU stuff that's up there. Rick, it's really fantastic. So great job. You guys are the model when we go out and speak to our other communities throughout the RDCK. So you make it real easy, and we appreciate that. Sorry, I had here and then there.
There's another question here.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
So I just wanted to basically reiterate that point that's been made. I don't do social media, I
Mhm.
don't do Facebook, I
Mhm.
don't listen to the radio.
Mhm.
And so I need to depend on those other methods of communication, those
You bet.
direct methods of communication.
Yeah, try and hit them all. Kimmel backs up on this. It's multimodal. You got to hit them all. This day and age, you can't put them all in just one place.
And the posters are great.
Yes, sir.
So currently you were saying there's, I forget what you described them as, action points? Or trigger points?
Yeah.
So is that just a coordinate basically that if the fire gets to, then you do something, or do you have anything proactive in place, like a plan or an access line put in that you can then immediately get?
Well, we do have the fuel-free, we'll call it, coming across there, not all the way across, of course. But yeah, we'll use that. I guess I'm just gonna put it out there, we're not walking away. Like, we're looking at it. It is a backing fire, like we said. We're watching it because, you know, when it does come to that point, hopefully by not next week, because Thursday next week, we're supposed to start getting rain, so hopefully that happens, but we have a plan in place if it does get to there and what we're gonna do.
Right, so it's not like, okay, now it's hit this point, what are we gonna do now?
No, there is a solid, where we'll tie it in to here and here. We have some points on the map. And we've been asked for those, we don't ever share those, ever, just so people are aware. And Amy, it's like evacuation alerts and order lines, we do not share that generally broadly.
The trigger points are also what triggers when an alert or an order is needed.
Right.
So
Yeah.
they'll do, I do understand that from being on the signing authority end of
Yeah.
it, is that when it hits a certain point, that's when he gets triggered and then I get triggered to initiate that whole process. And so it's a dual, it's about fighting it, it's also about the safety for the community.
I guess the creek where your water box is, so it'd be nice to know if that's where the line is, right?
Yeah, oh, 100%, like,
Yeah.
we're gonna, yeah, it's always, as you well know, it's always tricky.
Sorry, over here and then back to.
Hi everyone, I'd just like to introduce, we're Sheila and I'm Robert and we're from Birchdale. We're Birchdale. So I just really want to start out by saying, how amazing it was to live through this experience and to thank BC Wildfire and RDCK for their amazing work. It was a very feeling of close contact with the fire over in Birchdale, a real sense of the amount of humanity and human effort that went into it was truly amazing to us. We were thinking of you over here as we were over there, and we really felt the sense of, the amount of concern that everybody had. So we're just very, very grateful for the way in which it all worked out. And it was a very intense experience for us in Birchdale. And it got pretty close. But we live in Birchdale, so we kind of are used to not having much communication, and are recognize. But we feel very grateful that there's so much water nearby, and it was really like a war zone for me for many days. Every morning the helicopter arrived, and they were there all day long with the rest of the bombing and everything. But I guess I feel like that it was good to participate and do some of our effort on my own, like put a pump in the lake and put some fire hoses out and wet the house down and that sort of thing. Thinking that maybe someday that amazing infrastructure you have will be maybe taxed a little thin sometimes in some future events. So anyway, we're trying in Birchdale to do a little bit of our side of it. And then, I thought, though, that there was a moment where some of our sort of input into the communication was actually very, very helpful and important to arriving at certain plans of action. And so, again, we maybe weren't very well known maybe to
to all of the kind of data that could be put into making decisions. So hopefully this was a very good experience for everyone to understand more about these little places that exist and their watersheds. But yeah, I totally find some of the BC forest people kind of weird, but great.
They might go longer.
Can I acknowledge everything you guys did? I do know through Ross and Brendan, I saw Brendan in Slocan last weekend, how the infrastructure you guys had ready to go, I should not have been surprised by, but I was, I don't know if you've seen what Birch Hill has done, but the only thing that I'm going to say is I did put them on the Fire Smart community list because they didn't know about the program, and there are more supports that could be provided to you to do that work.
Okay.
So I told Brendan I've got it in my notes to follow up with you guys and just tell my staff now that they're on the list. Regardless, just hearing what you guys had set up, I wish I had pictures, and I hope someone did, because it was phenomenal. You obviously live remotely, and you were obviously prepared as good as you could, and I know Brendan was having a hard time finding you guys, and that was stressful. But once he started reporting back, I was
I'm a
like,
terrible communicator.
well, he's like, I should have known. I got there, and they had lines out, they had generators, everybody was fine. And I was like, well,
Yeah.
you're your son, you're gonna worry.
Yeah.
But just major kudos to you guys. I really think it was a big team effort to have the amount of infrastructure you had ready to roll and how well the community worked together. It was the fire was my biggest concern. That was the most uncontrollable thing, but all the people within it and around it, even though of course it was stressful and you wanted more communication and it could have gone differently, absolutely. All of you were fantastic in working as a team.
Yeah. Well, we're a very small group. So.
Small but mighty.
Yes.
Sorry, it was Jen?
Mhm.
You had a question?
I don't know what it was anymore. Sorry, Jen. That's not a problem. I'm really glad that some folk from Birchdale made it here. As much as it has been scary for the people in Johnson's Landing, I'm sure that it was that much more in the face.
Yeah, it was.
All the time.
I take it you didn't walk the trail.
What?
To get here.
No,
From Birchdale.
no, not to get here today. But you used to a lot. In the old days, this was where we picked up our mail, and we were
We rocked her a million times.
I still have one of the telephones, the Crankton Holler telephones in the house.
That was actually it's a good reminder, Clint, that
Next summer I'll
I didn't
come over, yeah.
realize Birchdale does not have phone lines. Are you all Wi-Fi calling?
Yeah, we're kind of
Yeah.
scattered differently with satellites and different
Yeah.
things. Wi-Fi, yeah.
Okay. That was a note that I didn't realize until mid-fire that their communications was completely Wi-Fi dependent or satellite dependent.
Some of them
Wi-Fi
are
mostly.
mostly
Okay.
Wi-Fi.
Satellite internet?
Yeah, that sort of thing.
We used to have that now.
But
Ken.
What's
Yeah.
that? It's in the house at the dad's house.
it was my first experience with being close to fire and all that goes into it. And I just had my head down working every day trying to participate in providing some water.
Still a phone down
And it just was really amazing to me how there were so many little factors that go into it. The direction of the wind, the humidity, so many elements of it, and so changeable, and so yeah. And then to be intense like that, and then a drop of water in your hand from rain. That was a pretty neat thing.
I just love your outlook on life.
So, so September the 14th did more, I think. It complemented, but it did more than a lot of other things.
100% it did.
Tanker one.
It's a really good time of year that it's happening. If it's going to happen at the same time, I was just up Emerald Lake in the Jardine Basin, and how dry the forest still is scary. It was hollow ground. I know we're going off topic now, but just climate change is really showing its face.
Do you remember your question?
I did. I remembered my question. It's something that I said to Carolyn on the drive here that I really wanted to ask. So, I'm sorry, I didn't. Kim, you mentioned that your phone line usually goes offline, round about November.
Mid-November, yeah.
And when does it come back on? Because one of my concerns is, when will the fires be checked on in the spring? Obviously, that depends on when our thaw is, and who the heck knows when that will be, because it could be January or it could be April.
So we have that phone set up so it just automatically routes to my other, I have 4, in the fire season, I have 4 phones going.
Okay.
So it's just that one, that specific line, I don't have to carry after mid-November, and it'll just route over to a different phone that I have.
Okay.
As terms of monitoring and spring plans, I'll leave that one to Art.
Yeah, so we'll definitely look at it, you know, over winter, of course, it should take care of itself. That we have options, and hopefully we can do a bit of an infrared scan on it and see what we have. Yeah,
Right?
so,
I did wonder if it was, if it's like the traveling underground, and I know with Briggs Creek, that was kind of a conversation that it could very much, like, snow will take it out, but it doesn't mean it's out. And I've seen that with slash piles too, where they just have a consistent, and in the spring they pop up. So I'm sorry, you have an infrared that can look for that?
That's so cool. It's really interesting.
yeah, so we have drones now that do it, and it's all done with an iPhone or whatever on a drone.
You used to have to wake up really early in the morning and have the door open on the helicopter, especially this time of the year, freezier, you know what's off, hanging out there looking through the infrared thing, and then you would drop a spike when you saw one. And then in the morning, like you'd get back to the camp, you know, at whatever, 6:37 in the morning, and then you'd go to the crew leaders and you would say, we got 30 spikes out there, go find them. You know, you'd have them rough on a map that somebody went, you know, shivering, trying to like make this tiny little mark while the wind's going by, and you're in what they call the you know,
Dead man's
dead man's curve, where you don't have enough forward speed that you could auto rotate, you aren't high enough to auto rotate, so if the helicopter craps out, you're just falling to the ground.
Wow.
So now they have drones.
Oh,
Wow.
So, yes, and
how dull has life become?
Yeah, totally.
and they actually
Back when I
map
did
it
it.
with
Sorry.
pinpoint locations, so the crew can walk right to it with their GPS.
Yeah.
I've always heard about fires just like hiding through a winter. And in Pilot Bay this spring, that happened on a property. I have a friend who lives in Pilot Bay, and on Pilot Bay Road in, I can't remember if it was March or April, but suddenly there was this fire, and it was like, how did this happen? And it got traced back to a slash pile from November, and it had just wended its way through a root system over the winter, and suddenly then there was a fire. So yeah, that of course.
It's very, very common.
I have heard that.
Yeah.
And with this being so late in the season, to me that makes it more likely in this instance.
Yep.
I've been following the heat map.
Yep.
That's online. I thought it was a very interesting tool and a good way to kind of monitor what's happening. And then we checked it the other day to see if these are showing up, and there was nothing
So,
on there.
are you using firms? It's called firms? Are you using, what's the other one? Sorry.
USG.
Yeah.
USG has one.
Yeah. I'm just,
It's on the,
They're all just bookmarks on their browser.
I couldn't tell you, it's just on the fire.
yeah, and it shows the heat signatures.
Make sure that the date is
Heat
accurate.
And wind and various things you can track,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And, yeah. and-
Make sure, sometimes the date bounces around on those a little bit, so make sure that you got, like, it'll even knock you out of the year sometimes.
modus.
But these
Yeah,
should
modus,
show
yeah,
up,
sorry.
all these little.
Yeah, they're still hot up there, so,
Mhm.
yeah, you should see them, and it just depends when the satellite passes over to you and takes the pictures.
And it has to be putting out 4,000 kilowatts to read it. So,
4,000.
4,000.
Oh, that's what I was wondering, so
Yeah.
maybe not. hot.
So sometimes it's smoldering, and that's a good thing because the fire's doing what we want it to do. It's not intense, it's not gonna destroy the forest.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
And so where does 6-1 go from here? You continue to monitor, you still have crews that are monitoring, you heli operating, or heli monitoring?
We've been monitoring from across the lake, and then every, 4 or 5 days we've been flying because we still have significant fire on the landscape.
And during the like Sunday, Monday, we had crews on the ground out here and flying as well.
There's the
around
weather,
wind event.
during the weather event, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, because of the wind
Yeah.
weather event that was coming, right? I did know that, yeah.
So
Ramp it up.
we will be monitoring over the weekend as well, so the crews will be working, so.
And then if you have residents that are observing, that you observe Robert Reese, isn't it?
No, mine was more of a humorous reflection, actually, so. But I thought I'd just love to hear a response, if I could ask that.
Yeah.
I spend a lot of time on the water. I'm in the waves all year round, in the dark, in the snowstorms, right? And I had an occasion one morning to cross the lake when the BC Wildfire Service boat was going over with crew members in it and crew. And the name for this boat rather struck me rather strange. It's called the Rat Boat.
Ratfish.
Ratfish, the Ratfish, all right?
Yeah.
And I have to tell you, I stopped in the middle of the lake and watched it until it got to Birchdale safely. Because I honestly have never seen a boat full of people like that go side to side in the waves so dramatically. And I'm like, I'm not quite sure, like, if they, because I had these other experiences with these colorful characters, I was like, I just want to bring it up that this boat is just like the mystery to me a little bit, and I really want you to know that it's not my yeah.
Yeah, so that isn't our boat.
Okay.
It's wreck sites and trails.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so they use that for all their stuff, but Justin offered it up to all the guys.
Okay. But anyway,
People back and
it really kind of struck me, and interesting, but also a unique phenomena that I hadn't ever seen in waves.
If you ever need a boat again, please call Search and Rescue. I think our boat's better than Justin's. Until
Yeah, it is better than Justin's, I know. That's it.
Yeah, I think
So,
How the fire still going up Fry Creek is
so what we will do, like I said, I know the map is out of date online, what people are seeing, so we will, as soon as we get a chance to properly fly it, and hopefully that'll be early next week. John tried to do it today and we couldn't, so we'll get that map updated. Yeah, the problem is what happens is we use all the helicopters all summer. Now people are trying to catch up on the regular work, so it's tough.
I had to pay double to get one yesterday morning. I needed one.
Yeah. No, right now, because the companies and some companies have stripped theirs right down to do maintenance. So anyways, we will get it updated as soon as possible for everybody. And on the last thing I want to say is thank you to everybody, because our crews really felt great. Like, we go to some places where it's not super comfortable, and everybody made them welcome, supported them, and yeah, thank you all for that.
The monitoring question I had was just regards to, like, I know you guys are looking at it, so if, Karen or Kate or Clint or anyone sees, I know Clint has direct line for you guys, but can they call that 318 number if they're like, hey, I'm seeing something, like, just keep doing that so that you also have eyes on the ground in that way. They might not be looking at the same things you are, but obviously it's helpful, I would hope, and so that line of communication can continue. Sorry.
Always.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's important, I just want to reiterate a couple things that Roger said, is like respect the local knowledge, but also the local intelligence. Like when I see, oh yeah, there's a whole arc, but it's like little glowy things, I'm not going to call that in. When I see there's 3 spots where it's candling, I'm going to call that in. Like, trust us. You said trust the Wildfire Service. I'm saying trust the people in the community. We're not calling because we have nothing else to do. We all have lots of things to do. We're calling because we see something that we want you to be aware of, that we want you to know. Like, oh yeah, every night things are actually candling, and I know when the helicopter flies over to do its recce flight because I see it, and it's all kind of calmed down. Like, I don't think anybody's prone to hysteria. We're trying to just provide you with information that may be useful for you. Our intentions are to be helpful to you, to let you know things that you're not going to see yourself because you're not flying over at 7 o'clock in the evening when there's a downdraft.
Well, and I think that when you call Kim directly, like that is the
I
information.
did,
when you
I
call-
was sending all
Yeah,
of your pictures to
Victoria.
the zones,
Yeah. when
or
you
to
call
the zone
Victoria.
specific,
Yeah.
singular.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for your time. We very much appreciate it. It's always really nice to get in touch with our communities after an incident like this. We learn from it. We take stuff away. We know when we work with Wildfire Service away that in the future that we're taking similar things away. So thank you very much for your time. Very much appreciated. Thank you for your feedback. We're going to be cleaning up here for a bit. So if you want to grab any one of us for a quick chat, please do.
I know that you guys are a very fire smart community, but we bring these to all of our community meetings. So if you'd like your little fire smart begins at home manual, they're right here.
And we have a whole bunch of things back there on the back table from the RDCK that can support you as well. I think our fire smart materials there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you can call us. We'll come and do a free home assessment. Let you know where you can make improvements. It looks like the hall just had an assessment and did a bunch of work.
They've done a ton of stuff. and they've
Yeah,
got
based
lots
on the
of
Fire
funding.
Smart assessment. So that's available, and cash rebates. Little teaser next year, up to $1,000 cash
And I
rebate for
fund
that.
them too.